Yo guys, the lights are out. That means the underground series continues. I'm going to show you guys a different way to distort your bass instead of relying on people's like 808 drum kits, which is fine. I'm going to show you guys how to like custom make your own distortion so that you don't have to keep trying to figure out which kit somebody has. Okay. So for example, here's the 808 of this track. Now this is before distortion. This is a reference to a Slayer in Wah Era's track. Now what we're going to do is activate the wave shaper, the original one I put in this song, and then the BusyWorks Beats Smart Compressor that I gave out for a limited time. Here's before. Here's after. Alright, so I'm going to show you guys an even more advanced thing. It's way deeper than just opening up Fruity Wave Shaper. Alright, so firstly, let's open up Fruity Wave Shaper. You guys can mess with Fruity Soft Clipper as well for different tones. There's no one way to do anything here, guys. I'm just giving you guys a strategy. Okay, so with Fruity Wave Shaper, what most people don't know is you can switch this to bipolar mode. This will allow you to shape the volume when it goes up here and then the negative polarity down here. So what we can do is click here. Let's go to oversample, put this on 4 times so we don't have what's called aliasing. Aliasing, essentially, when we distort stuff, it can add more frequencies that we didn't even want in the actual mix. So that's why we have this on 4 times. And then we have DC offset so that we don't have any like clicking that happens from different distortion techniques. All right, so the first thing is to understand, I recommend you guys start here by just right clicking the top right node and switching the curve type. Okay, so let's start right at the top with smooth, and then let's turn this tension curve up. We're not gonna hear much of anything. Okay, so let's right click and make this a single curve. And now we're gonna start hearing tone shapes. It's also a way to make your 808 kind of sit different. So this thing that we're looking at is called a transfer curve. If I just keep cranking this up, we're going to compensate for the post level here. This is one way to do it. You know, it sounds kind of cool. But what most people don't realize, again, is that on bipolar mode, you can also change the shape down here. And you can right click these nodes and change out the shape. So we right click here, change the curve type. And you can hear as I pull it down, you get more or less bass depending on how you shape that curve. Now let's switch the curve type to single curve 2. Let's keep changing these node types. So notice when I change, sorry y'all, notice when I change these curve types, you get different distortion types. So this one fits this track the best. All right, but let's right click, go to double curve. You're not gonna hear much there because we would need more points. So again, the double curves, like for what we're doing at this specific point in the audio, unless we get to double curve 3 where it's more like a square shape. We're basically squaring off the sound, if you guys need a definition for what we're doing. All right, now you can right click, and here's where most people don't even check these curves. Now that one's not gonna give us much. Now we can drive these curves. So let's say it's not giving us a sound. What we can do is turn up what's called the pre-amp, and then it's going to drive the signal harder into the curve. So this would need a lot of volume going in. So in this case, we would need to either go to the channel level in the channel rack and crank up the volume here, or we can add, I learned this from Lifestyle Did It. In Parametric EQ2 on the far left, there's a fader right here. So we're using this as, you know, the gain stage into the wave shaper. So I'm pushing a lot of gain into this thing. that's the thing about different curves. Different curves respond to signals completely differently. So let's right click here. Let's go to stairs. Now here's where it's going to get super distorted. And the reason I'm making this video is because you guys may think that you just need to slam everything past 0. The issue with that is when you slam stuff past 0, certain video editors and certain platforms, once they don't have 32-bit float, and you can't just turn it down. Like once you go past 0, it's past 0, and they're basically going to destroy the audio past that point. So just slamming it past 0 is not really going to help. I'm not sure how FL handles when it exports, so that's not, I don't know the exact thing they do specifically, but certain platforms, again, once you go past 0, they're not going to be able to forgive the volume and be able to turn it back down, so you lose information. So instead of just telling people to just slam it past 0, which, you know, basically what I'm saying is you can get a distorted sound without going past 0. That's the short. So right here with the stairs preset, and again, you can left click this tension to change out the style. Now, the more of these stairs we give it, the more, I'll say, like a bit crush type sound it gives it, like a rectified sound for those who use Serum. So that's how you get that, like, that feedback sound. And if you like make it really small, you guys can't even see the curvature anymore. I'm just left clicking and pulling this all the way down, and we're getting really small square waves, and adds this fine little bit crush detail, but it's very subtle, so it's not overtaking the mix. So the bigger the square, the more aggressively bitey. The smaller, the more phasey it's gonna sound. So is that like wishy-washy phasey sound? Okay, now let's right click this node up here, switch it to smooth stairs. So this is gonna be more of a sine wave curvature, more of a bubbly tone instead of that lasery phasey sound. So now we're basically modulating a sine wave by sine wave. That's essentially what we're doing. And we get that same sine wave whipped sound. So this is how you can create really custom 808s. And the cool thing is you can right click another node, and let's say you like that tone but you want to do something else on the high end, we could also right click over here, go back to signal curve 3, and then turn the preamp. And then switch it out. I forget what curve we had before. Let's just go stairs because I forgot which one. And then we're using the preamp we're basically creating two textures. One is that phasey sound, the other one is a like crunchy distortion sound. Once it hits a certain velocity. And then we can push into this again with the preamp. All right, so let's go back to, there's another curve type I want to show you guys here. You gotta be careful when this thing hits this vertical line, that's when you get weirdness. Okay, so let's go back to, it's hard to tell what the shape is, here we go. So that's smooth stairs, and then let's go, sorry y'all, I knew there was one that was super aggressive, I'm sorry. So here's a pulse wave. This is where you're really gonna hear that feedback. Let's hear this in context. So I'm distorting the bass without everything else distorting. There is a certain science between distorting everything on purpose so that it has like a modulated sound to it. But this is how you distort the bass without, again, wobbling everything, especially when you're recording vocals. You don't want to destroy the vocal take all the time. It's just a thing that I just want people to be more intentful. Is that the right word? Have more intention behind. like super crazy to the point where I don't know the math between this. But this is where it goes into electric guitar territory. Let's see what other curve we have. Let's go to the wave. I think you can even drag in waves to create a custom wave. So you're basically modulating your sound by another sound. We're gonna try that. I think you could do that in this. I'm not sure. See those upper harmonics we're starting to get? So if you're familiar with FM synthesis, this will make a little bit more sense, but there's no way I'm explaining FM synthesis in this video. But when you modulate, let me show you guys. I don't know why I said I wouldn't do it, and then I said I will do it. But in this plugin called FM8, for example, this is the perfect tool for learning FM synthesis. This thing is the best, in my opinion. So for example, right here we have a sine wave, which is operator F. Now when I modulate operator F by itself, you get these upper harmonics. What happens if we keep modulating it by itself? It becomes noisy, and after a while just turns into white noise. So with what we're doing with the wave shaper is pretty much the same exact thing, just at different speeds, different. And if I change the, see how it's like that bubbly sound? And then if you change the waveform, so basically that's a similar concept. I can't say it's the same thing because transfer curves a little bit about the waveform itself too. All right, so those are just things that nobody really told you guys about, and that's how they're getting these really unique 808s. But I'm going to show you guys even more stuff outside of this. Now, one last thing before we move to the next plugin is I think you can drag, you can drag audio in to create your own custom transfer curve. So this is like an infinite science because there's no way I would be able to study all these different wave curves. So this one, again, let's try like a snare drum or something random. So it adds this little harmonic sound. That wasn't, it's like a dissonant thing, so it stacks up and it almost makes it its own note. I think that's pretty dope. So again, that's an infinite science. You guys can literally drag any sample on this thing that, there's no way I'm going to be able to study that many variations. But most people don't know you could do that. Okay, now let's talk about the next plugin, which a lot of people kind of sleep on, FabFilter Saturn 2. This is a saturation plugin. Now most people just use it for vocals. They don't really think that deeply about it. But we're going to switch it over to a saturation mode here. Let's go to amplitude mode. And this is going to model guitar amps. So let's see, let's drive the signal in. So right now we don't have enough signal, so we're going to use the Pro Parametric EQ2 to push the signal in. Also on the left side here, it has the input gain. You guys could just turn it on. Now let's switch to amp type. Let me solo because it's hard to hear. So this is how you get that like impulse response type sound. Now what most people don't realize about this plugin is if you turn up the feedback, you get like this. Let's pull the frequency down. Now we're creating like, whoa, see, it can get a little jarring, so you gotta be careful with this. All right, so see how it adds that at the end. Now, if you're crazy, you can go to the bottom right and turn off the feedback, whatever it's called, like the feedback gate, I guess they're putting on it. And again, we can blend the mix level, so we don't have to have this at 100%. So we can bring back the bass and just monitor the output gain here. So that's how you get more of that like guitar sound. We're not using typical wave shaper stuff. You could also mess with the tones for a brighter 808. So I'm just showing you guys like there's an infinite world of distortion out there. Alright, so see how that almost like that almost went bad. Right, so you gotta be careful with the feedback. Alright, so that's how we're getting that like sound that gives the 808. It makes it feel like it's in a space. Because I assume they did impulse responses on these. Most people don't check these presets. Let's hear these in context. All right, so all different tones. And lastly, let's run it through some more aggressive amps. So hopefully you guys can hear different harmonics depending on the stack, if it's dissonant, if it's, you know, whatever, even or odd. It will or won't go along with your song musically speaking. So harmonics are basically multiplying your sound times a number. And if that number it multiplies it with doesn't match the music, it's just going to sound like this, where it doesn't really fit in. It's just going to sound out of key. All right, so that's part of different harmonics and distortion, is adding that dissonance. Alright, so that's the plugin people don't think about, is Saturation 2 for this purpose, which is to drive. Most people just stick to the tube mode or the tape modes. This is more of a, the tube mode is more of a enhancer than it is like changing the actual sound. So if you had to go in here, for example, so I have to really crank it to even hear anything. Now, most tape stuff you have to push into it, so that's what the input gain is for. But as you guys can hear, it's not like changing the sound dramatically, it's just enhancing what's already there. Now broken tube may change the sound. Let's try it. So this is giving you dissonant harmonics on that one. Again, there's like a billion presets in there you guys can mess with. I've never gone to the effects, but rectify is going to square off the sound. So let's. I wonder why it's not giving a signal on that one. Not sure why. Okay, so let's go to another plugin. So we covered the main two that you guys are going to be messing with. Let's cover some that you may overlook. So this one's from Air. It's called Soft Clipper. And this one's just really good in general for your mix for the 808. We're going to turn up the drive and then turn down the post level. And then we can switch the transfer here, curve. Now once you drive past a certain point, it pretty much is the same shape. You're just turning your 808 into a square. So there's an in-between area where we're trying to get just enough square odd harmonics. So again, super slept on plugin. especially for drums and stuff. What else is there to show you guys? Let me see what else we have in here. So here's a classic company. This is called Amplitude, and this is version 5. So by default, it runs through this amp. Now we can do a monophonic signal. We can do it in series. We could do parallel. So usually with 808, we're doing just one signal flow where it's a straight through. But if you're more advanced, you could do parallel signal chains in this. And then here we could just turn up the preamp. And then, so basically we're treating the 808 like it is a guitar. And that's why when you guys hear these underground beats, you're like, why does it sound like that? It's because they're not using the traditional, just like soft clippers that we're using. Now, again, remember, there's a difference between people producing and the people who are sound designing. I'm speaking on a sound design level. You know, this is how they're making the 808s that have all this grit on it, that when people go to use, they don't have to do a bunch of stuff to it. So they just run it through a soft clipper. But I'm talking about the people who are making the 808s. They're doing all this type of stuff to get these tones. I'm not saying this exact method for every single person, but to get that guitar-y type distortion, it's just different. So let's switch the amps. Now they're all gonna just give you different harmonic structures here, but the main things are to mess with the preamp and just turn down the master gain. So these are a little bit more smoother to my ear. Here's before. Here's after. All right, so now we're, again, like I said, we're getting into rock guitar territory. So I don't know, these look like Marshall amps. I don't know all the single Marshall amps in the world. Okay, but you guys can just click through. And again, this is version 5. I'm sure they're on a new version by now. And I thought you could choose by aggression. I guess not. So you got to be careful with amps because they, you know, some of these are built for heavy rock. So we got to be careful not to just blow our speakers. So overdrive would be similar to, so here we have a preamp and then we have the master volume here. And what I might do, let's say I want to blend this in. I could either use the mix level here in FL, just turn it down. Probably the safest way to go about it, or you can use the parallel processing inside the actual plugin and you could bypass one of the amps, but I forgot this route to the left and right, so never mind. I think parallel is this one. I had the wrong one selected there. But even here you would need to understand how to turn it down. So I guess the best bet, yeah, is to use the FL Studio mix level here. Now we can shape this with the preamp. Most people tell you guys that you shouldn't like stereoize bass, or you shouldn't have bass widen because of mono compatibility. Like, just use plugins that get you guys the sound you want, because a lot of the stuff people are talking about, they just don't know how to sound design. So Microshift is a plugin that will basically resify your 808s and it will widen it out. Let me get rid of one of these. Now, if we're driving into a mix bus, for example, we can use Soft Clipper. We can use the same techniques with Fruity Wave Shaper. So we don't have to necessarily be clean on the mix bus, but we just have to be understanding as to where we're adding this distortion. Because again, like I said, most people just slam it past 0. Like, they'll just do this. But they don't realize that when you export past 0 and then you go to a video editing software or any platform that doesn't do 32-bit float, you know, it's going to have consequences if it's just going past 0. So it's not always the answer. I've been in a session with an engineer and mixing music producer, formerly a recording engineer. And I mean, they were going like plus 16 dB in FL. They thought, you know, the beats are cranking, but at the end, after the session, he turned everything down because he understands going past 0 has a downside. So just because people do it on video and stuff does not mean that's how you guys should be rocking. I'm not telling you guys what to do. I'm just saying that I just explained it. Okay, so anyway, let's go to Fruity Wave Shaper. And let's mess with the curve type. Let's go to stairs. Make it bipolar mode. Now we're adding that like bit crush sound across the whole track. So now it feels digital, doesn't feel just clean and stagnant. And then we can move this up. So again, the more square, like the more visuals, the more visible squares you guys can see, the more it's going to be more distorted. So the bigger the square, the more distortion. The smaller, the more of that bit crush sound. And again, we could use the mix level. So I think this is a good blend here. Another trick I like is, not that this is about bass necessarily, but you guys can go down here to where it's a stereo separation and just widen this out. It just tends to work for this type of genre. It thins out the bass just a little bit. We can also cut the lows and then boost up at like 70 hertz. So that only 70 has that thump and then everything else kind of falls down. So it's not super boomy, because most people just crank up the boom. Not saying that's wrong, it's just sometimes that boom is not the most stylistic we can get the sound to be. But it is a good modulator to boost bass like that. But we can also just boost that 70 instead of it being like super wobbly the whole time. So for example, let me boost 40 hertz and below or 60 hertz and below. So by the way, this is everything they told us not to do. They told us to cut the bass. That's why the underground is so interesting, because they literally break every rule that a mixing engineer taught us. All right, now let's boost at 70 hertz. So now the kick or the thump becomes the thing that modulates everything. So it's just up to you guys, the style you guys are going for on this one. Most underground tracks I hear, they don't really emphasize the kick. It's more so like the sub energy. So in this case, or they'll thin out the subs and then boost the 70 hertz just a little bit and then push the entire track. But you guys can hear that crunch. So the further we go into the wave shaper, this is what gain staging is about, is understanding how much of the crunch we're getting per the volume increase. So I'd say this is a decent level. Now another area where we can get crunch is Fruity Soft Clipper. And if we turn the threshold to the left, it creates like a boxy compressed crunch. And if we turn it to the right, it's more open. So if you want like a softer sound, I'll say, turn the threshold to the left. And we have two soft clippers, so we're going to push the gain out of this one into the final soft clipper that's just catching everything going past 0. And the threshold is all the way to the right. And then again, we can push into it depending on how loud we want to be. Now because I think the stereo width comes after the chain, it's going past 0. So it isn't really prudent to think that this is the last point in the mix. So in that case, we would have to add a Fruity Soft Clipper to the master channel because that comes after this channel's stereoization. So long story short, I'm going to turn off the soft clipper on the channel itself and then put it on the master. And then it won't go past 0. So let's do a before. Here's before all the effects we added. All right, now here's after. Now we're going to turn down that guitar just a little bit more. It's just a little aggressive. So here's where, again, gain staging determines how the frequencies are tilting and all types of stuff. So this is where you might go back to the EQ and retilt the lows back in because it feels a little heavy. It feels a little thin, I should say. But now the distortion is affecting everything. So we just have to be aware that where we're adding these distortion elements. Let's take off the guitar distortion on the 808 and let's just run it through the Fruity Wave Shaper. This is where you're just using your ear to determine what amount of which thing you like, and this is all about gain staging here, guys. Another plugin people like on their but you guys, the reason I talk from the Fruity Wave Shaper point of view is because I want you guys to understand how to create your own harmonics the way you guys want. If you just want the easy button, we showed you guys this months, probably years ago, the MoMA plugin from Analog Obsession to get that Playboy Cardi type sound. I was probably one of the first, if not the original person, to make the tutorial about it. So here we have glue mode on even harmonics, and then we're going to turn the amount up. So we just have to decide, do we want the amp distortion and this effect, or do we just want this effect on everything? So we still, like, even just with that MoMA plugin on the mix bus, it didn't give that extra grit to the 808. So this is why I'm saying, you know, gain staging and understanding all these different points of saturation are very important. of the bass going into the MoMA plugin, it doesn't have that pleasing saturation we had before going into the wave shaper approach. It's just more, I guess in some cases it could be a cool sound. It just depends on what you guys are going for. Here's before. And there's another plugin called, whoops, that's not it. Here it is, MAIM. All right, so this plugin is very confusing in terms of like what to do with it. So I'm going to turn down the makeup gain first, because what you don't want to do is just crank this thing going in and then it goes crazy with the distortion. So turn down the makeup gain first, then mess with the drive knob. This is really heavy-handed distortion here. So in this case, I would pull back the dry wet level. And I think it was the YouTuber Analog Princess that put us onto this plugin. I would have never known about this plugin. So we're gonna blend it in. Now the cool part, it has this like bit rate thing, which I don't even know what all this does, to be honest. I just go by ear. It could be just squarifying like we already did, but then they have this feedback thing. So I have no idea what this thing is doing. I assume it's doing grains and then feeding back the audio pitched up or pitched down. But I have no idea. Basically, it's just a texture machine, and from what I remember, it's free. Forgot it. They have this error thing here. So it's adding all these textures that weren't in the sound. Now, this is an experimental plugin. I wouldn't say I added on a lot of stuff, only because it's just such a specific sound. So you guys might mess with the drive and the makeup gain more than all these other effects here. But I just wanted to add it in as an honorable mention here. Again, that one, you really got to have a use case for that. So I think we covered everything that you guys can basically learn how to use on your own. Let me see if there's any plugins I may have missed. I forgot to mention Arturia's new effects rollout. So people kind of sleep on Arturia in terms of their effects. They have a really good spring reverb, for example. You don't even have to touch the settings. It's perfect. So here we're going to use, which one is this here? The Cold Fire. Now this one's built for more distortion types. And let's turn the wet level down. Now, because there's so many things to go through, we're just going to go through presets here. We don't have time to be going through everything. So this can add another texture to you guys' track. Let me actually handle the wet level here at the mixer level. And let's go through presets. So stuff like this you wouldn't get with just the simple FL Studio Fruity Wave Shaper. So you could add that to your melodies. So for example, if I turned off the bass, now we have a really unique melody. That'd be cool for melodies. I can't see that on the entire beat, but definitely on melodies. So here's definitely a unique sheen to the beat. So like I said, guys, there's a thousand different ways to do distortion. There's no one way. I actually forgot to show you guys something from the Fruity Wave Shaper. I'll just make that into a different video. And again, we don't have to apply it to the entire mix. We could just do this on the bass. Like this. Nobody would ever guess your mixing chain. So this is doing a similar thing to the MAIM plugin. Again, I would probably use this on melodies more so. Actually sounds dope. See what happens if we... Like I said, guys, the combinations are endless. Again, I'll just show you guys a couple more and then we got to wrap this video. So here's, so we did Cold Fire. The next one's called the Op Amp by Arturia. Let me turn off this thing so you guys don't get confused. So would I put this on a mix? Not necessarily, but it does add a nice like sheen style. These presets are a little bit harder to hear. So that could add perceived depth on that one. Again, these are probably more melodic focused than mix focused. This one's pretty dope. So that one's a little more aggressive. And then lastly, we have the Culture Vulture. I used to use the UAD version, and then I heard the real version, which sounds way different than the plugins. Like very, very, very different. And so this one, from what I remember, it sounds good. Better than the UA version, but I can't remember. So let's pull back the mix level. This is more of an enhancer than something that's just going to completely change the tone. But the key here is to turn up your drive. I keep mine in between 6 and 7. And then we can mess with the bias. Basically more crunch on the left there. How do I reset? I don't know how to reset this thing. It's not resetting. So we're gonna, let me see. How do we go back to default? Template, default. And then you could also change the type of distortion. Think of it just like we're changing the transfer curve the same way we did in Fruity Wave Shaper. So some people may go for this crunchy of a mix. Personally, I just don't like this much crunch on the entire mix. So, I mean, some people may put it on there, some people won't. But again, to get the most control though, I'd recommend the Fruity Wave Shaper for you guys. I forgot to mention in the Fruity Wave Shaper, if you go back to single curve and let's say you guys want to create your own shape, you could just right click nodes in, and the more like sawtooth or square you get, it gives you more of that, like, I don't know how to explain it, that lasery tone, I'll just say. Or you'll get more anomalies, I'll say. Let's put it that way. So this one, when we went down with the curve, it's creating that little click. But personally, I think you guys can get the most value out of the Fruity Wave Shaper. It's just a little bit more control. like that sounds very similar to the moment plugin. Go back to mix level. Forgot my new plugin, busyworksbeats.com/AI mastering. This thing will make anything sound analog. This mix is very distorted, so what we're gonna have to do is pull up what's called the buffer length so it has time to read it. And then what we're gonna do is just add very specific things. Now most people just turn stuff up. What we're gonna do is hit init. And by default, if we go to bypass, let's fill the mix here at this level. And then when I turn it on, there should be a weight added to the track. Now the thing is, this plugin needs headroom, so we're gonna have to turn down the input. Here's before. Now let's add some compression. Let's go to the master. Let's switch this to transformer. Let's go to mid mode. That will make the kicks knock a little bit more. Let's add more width. And then we can mess with the loud knob. Or the bass. Now one more thing about this style is for this genre, they don't want limiters here, so we're going to turn off the limiters under the limiter mode. So for this genre, you do have to go in and tweak some of the stuff. It's not just going to do everything for you, even though we have a one button solution called AI Master. For this genre, we have to go into the actual settings. Here's without the analog. Here's with it. Listen to how much weight we lose once we turn this off. With it, it just adds that weight, that density, and that depth. It just depends on what you guys are going for. There's no right or wrong. This just adds that weight back to the track. So here's before. I forgot on the actual channel we stereo the sound, so we don't want to overly stereo stuff, so I turned that off. Forgot we had that on. So here's before. Just listen to how narrow and small it feels. Here's after. I'll turn it, again, there's no right or wrong, but I'll turn it on and off just so you guys can feel the energy difference. All right, so those are tips on how to distort your 808s, your bass, and mess with your mix bus. This video is long, but I just wanted to show you guys from a sound designer's perspective and not just people who are just using samples that are already done for you. I wanted to show you guys where the source is so that you can control it at the source and not just have to rely on a drum kit. But I want to thank you guys for watching this game from busyworksbeats.com. To learn sound design, music theory, mixing, mastering, go to busyworksbeats.com/premium. Peace out, guys.